Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. Thanks for tuning in to another Supatease video. And in this one, we're going to be breaking down the data with our weekly analysis to see which specializations are starting to dominate when it comes to PvP in World of Warcraft. And if you want to make sure you're staying up to date with news related to World of Warcraft, educational and entertaining content, then make sure to smash that subscribe button. Your support is greatly appreciated on my long-term journey of trying to get to 100,000 subscribers. And I know as a mostly PvP-focused creator, this is quite a challenge, so I would really appreciate your help in this endeavor. But let's get started on the video. There's a lot of specializations to talk about. I've set the scope here to the past 7 days. We're going to be looking at the top 5,000 players, and we're going to be looking at melee DPS, ranged, and healers. Let's start with the melee DPS. Rep Paladins are starting to massively creep up as far as representation here into the #1 position for melee DPS. Now, why is this the case? I think it's mostly because it's very straightforward. It's very easy to pick up for any level of skill, and even in the hands of the most advanced players, we saw in the AWC that Rep Paladins can actually make a top 4 showing even in a tournament environment. Do I think that it's the absolute most broken thing at the pinnacle of skill? No, but when it comes to the entire spectrum of the ladder, it is a very healthy and solid option with a lot of variety as far as comp specializations, and it fits really well in the meta of this kind of burst one-shot cooldown trading because it has a lot of cooldowns itself, and it does a lot of one-shotting, and it can support its teammates and help them survive through one-shots. So it's just all around a great pick at the moment, no matter your skill level, which is why I think that its representation is so high. Also, its fantasy is pretty strong with Uther, with the hammers of the Paladins, right? Paladins just always been a very strong fantasy. It's got everything working for it, so it's likely going to be at the top. Windwalker Monk is the second, and what's interesting about this is that it's highly represented on the ladder and it was highly represented in the tournament. It ended up winning in both regions on Windwalker, and there was a debate going on, amongst which melee DPS is the strongest, which one's the most powerful. Everyone was anticipating Subtlety Rogue, even myself included here, but Windwalker ended up edging a bit ahead of it, just getting tremendous amounts of pressure on mages in particular, but it's well-rounded into pretty much everything, and some of the mobility issues that it has can be solved through talents, like the one where after you roll, you can double jump and get an extra dash. That's getting you a lot of extra uptime. Ride the Wind to suppress snare effects. These are types of things that deal with the mechanics that would typically counter you and keep you in line, like a warrior kind of has to deal with, but you don't have to deal with that, and you just do tremendous damage in your cooldown window. So again, just all about that cooldown window, heavy burst damage. I do kind of hope that if we see an update here for PvP, is that they lock in on the cooldowns of a lot of these specializations and lower their power in that window, and then bring up their baseline stats outside of it. So there's a few ways that they could do that. One way to do it would be to just go into the cooldowns, reduce their effectiveness by 50%, buff the trinket stat bonus, the main stat of agility for damage dealers and intellect for casters, buff that to buff their overall sustain, but don't do it to healers, because then we're going to just have games that never end right now, right? Being a healer with the cooldown damage as high as it is feels like it's impossible to heal, but it's only impossible to heal the cooldowns. That's why it's very important to be specific about that. It's not hard to heal in general, because if the cooldowns didn't exist, everyone would be at 100% health the entire time. It is only difficult to heal the cooldowns, which is why that gameplay can be frustrating, because they use the cooldown, you die in a millisecond, what was I supposed to do? And then outside of that, you don't really have a lot to do because no one's taking damage. So that's the gameplay that I'm hoping they can shift towards, and there's a bunch of different ways that they could approach it, but I really hope that they do. If they don't, then the only other option is that they're going to bump up the cooldown damage of everything else, maybe bump up the cooldown healing of the healers as well. Subtlety Rogue was still present in the tournament. It actually still had a place, and I think one of the main reasons we didn't see more of it was because it wasn't good into mages. What is the reason Subtlety Rogue is good? It stuns. What can't you do to a mage? You can't stun them. So just that issue in the tournament alone is why I think Subtlety Rogue fell off a bit, but we still saw it, and at times it still looked very strong. In positions where it didn't fight a mage, it still kind of felt like the best rogue slot to lock in. It's also very easy compared to the other rogue specializations in its previous iterations, so it's easier to pick up, really solid, strong in a wide variety of content, which is why we see its representation so high here on the ladder. Subtlety Rogue is one of those specs, again, where I don't know if its cooldown damage is that over the top anymore. I think it's mostly the stuns that are now getting a little bit more frustrating. So maybe they can bring it down the damage slightly there for the cooldowns of Subtlety Rogue. But again, like those small changes they were making to Rogue, bringing down the cooldowns, is exactly what they should be doing and continuing to do until they get it to that point where it's not just this one shot cooldown area and then nothing's happening, right? But Salty Rogue is still obviously a great pickup. Arms Warrior, we even saw these in the tournament, and in my tier list predicting the tournament, I said we probably wouldn't see a single one of them. We saw it in the Turbo Cleave and the Thunder Cleave, which was niche situations, but it was very good in those niche situations where it was being selected, and surprisingly did well against things like BM Hunter and Devastation Evoker, for example, with Blizzo playing it in the lower semifinals. So it still had some representation in the tournament setting. It was a little bit of a liability as far as defense, and was obviously going to get shut down very heavily by like Windwalker Mage and Rogue Mage in those combinations, especially. Otherwise, we would have seen Blizzo like in the grand finals. But we also saw F tier come very close to winning, and they utilized Elemental Shamans and Feral Druid. So a lot of these specs, they're just kind of waiting for the rebalance, bringing down some of these guys' cooldown windows. Obviously, you have to compensate that because their damage outside of those windows is not high. This isn't me just asking for these specs to be nerfed and then they disappear. This is asking me for them to redistribute their damage in a way that's just more fun for everybody in the game. You feel stronger outside of your cooldown window. Healers feel like there's something to do without just panicking about getting one shot. It's about making the game healthy. It's not about making a spec terrible when I'm talking about rebalancing the game here. But Warrior is probably in a healthy spot, right? They took the demolish damage down. It doesn't completely one-shot you. That's an example of a good change. There's just some outliers that still need to be addressed. Unholy DK, we saw 0 of it, but it's still very well represented on the ladder. This is a completely healthy margin in ladder gameplay, but in tournament, I think we might have actually seen it like once. It kind of got rocked by Rogue Mage. Maybe not the best comp for it to be able to beat a Rogue Mage. There's some more debates into that. But I think with Unholy DK, is that they target their cooldowns. They nerf their cooldowns patch after patch, which got them to a healthy place. But in a world where there's some specs that still have their cooldowns just way out there in the stratosphere as far as damage, if you're healthy, you look bad. And that's just the reality of it. So you either go the other direction and you make everyone unhealthy again, which is just cooldown one-shot gameplay, or you have to make sure you address every single specialization's cooldowns and get them to the same margin of healthy gameplay. Enhancement Shaman, still decent representation on the ladder. We saw it in the tournament as well. Main difficulties for Enhancement Shaman is that you just get completely countered by rogues. You can be stunned, gouged, blind, disarmed on your cooldown window. It's like the prime example. Now, I do think some specializations, it's okay, much like Enhance, where you lean a little bit more into their cooldown window because that's just how they've historically been, is more of like that burst class. But I still think the most fun iteration I had for Enhancement Shaman was Dragonflight Season 1, and it felt like you just had damage the whole time. Your lava lashes just always hit really hard. I had a lot of fun with enhancement on that season. That's why I know that the game is fun when you get it to that spot where cooldowns aren't as important. You do damage the whole time. Healers feel like they have something to do without having to just panic to react to a big one-shot that's impending. You don't feel like you're completely screwed in the game if you get crowd controlled in a 3-second window of time and then you know you're useless. It's just a way healthier, better experience for everybody regardless of skill, whether you're a newcomer or a pro player. I know that to be true. So I do hope that they will take the time to continue what they were doing with some of these specializations, with bringing their cooldowns down and bringing their damage outside of the cooldowns up. Just continue to do that, basically. Don't just stop, because I think there's still some work to be done. Havoc Demon Hunter, a little bit of representation here, but again, just hard countered by rogues. The one shot in the cooldown window, really locking you out. It seems like you don't really have a lot of hero talent options either anymore. I think most of Havoc Demon Hunters are playing Eldraki, and they just don't play Fel Surged at all, which is weird because Fel Surge is the cooldown based one. You would expect that one to actually be the stronger option, but that one must have been targeted pretty significantly for nerfs. Again, Havoc's just kind of in a healthy margin, but these guys, they need to have their damage redistributed, to not nerfed, redistributed. Okay. Fury Warrior, I was actually expecting Fury Warrior to take over Arms Warrior. I thought for sure that was going to be the case. It didn't end up being the case, though. Arms Warrior was still the spec that was selected in tournament settings. They did go pretty hard again at Fury Warrior's cooldowns. Wish that they had the same, targeting here towards these cooldown windows that they did with Warrior, because they put Warrior in a healthy spot with those changes that they did. Whereas with these specs, they kind of slap on the wrists, just like little light taps, which can work if you keep doing it, but if you stop, then they're just still up there at the top. So Fury Warrior's in one of those spots where if they do redistribute the damage of those high represented specializations that have those huge burst windows, then you're probably going to be good. Feral Druid, one of the lowest represented, but honestly, considering its difficulty, I don't think this is a terrible level of representation, because it's debatably the most complex melee to play. One of them, top 2 probably. And it's still reasonably healthy. And we saw it in tournament play quite a lot. Very close to winning, right? In a lot of cases, even in the current meta. Lots of stuns, lots of sustain. Honestly, just in a healthy spot. It might be a little bit heavy on crowd control as far as strengths, but it's just in a healthy spot, and it's just a matter of bringing down some of these higher represented ones. Survival Hunter doesn't have the same type of lockdown as we see from some of these top specs, or a power of team utility, right? Like Roar of Sacrifice is just kind of met at the moment. It can do one shots, but again, more predictable with things like Boom Shot, heavily visual. Although Takedown is pretty instant, and provides immediate burst damage. But it's just kind of like, seems like it's in a healthy spot. But these guys burst damage, same type of deal. It's just a healthy spot. So it's like you can make it work, but you'll feel like these guys have bigger windows of burst. Frosty K, now this guy's pretty low on representation, even though we saw it in the tournament a little bit and absolutely blasted its cooldown window. I think Frosty K is one of the most egregious feast or famine specs at the moment when it comes to like the Pillar of Frost damage versus not Pillar of Frost damage. So to me, it's one of the ones that needs like the biggest redistribution of damage. I think it would help people play it also. There's casual players, because like if you're a casual player, you're logging the game, you're just pressing your buttons and you don't know how to sync your cooldowns up exactly, then you just never win as one of these specs. Whereas if you're a pro, you know how to sync all of them up, you know how to isolate the right guy and group them all up, then you're just one-shotting them and it feels like they can't do anything. So it's like, that seems just very binary. So I think that they do need to do more redistributing of damage here, but I think Frosty K will likely start expanding up, because I actually think it's debatably better than Unholy DK right now, mostly due to Delirium for mages. And you'll see that when we get to the range DPS, how many mages there actually are. Assassination Rogue is having a pretty healthy uptick, considering it could completely fell off the bandwagon. So changes here, again, there are positive changes that are being made. I think it's just being overshadowed by the fact that they are very light-handed with the changes to the top specs, and honestly more heavy-handed with like Warrior than I've seen with anything else. I don't know what's going on there. Warrior just is really heavy-handed, but Assassination Rogue starting to creep back up to a healthy margin. It's one of the harder specs. It's focused around bleed sustain damage, so it's not really fitting in the meta. It's countered by Paladins. So Assassination Rogue is actually on an uptrend. I think the changes have been good here for Assassination. Outlaw Rogue still at the bottom on representation, even though almost every pro player is like playing it in tournament level, and it's getting very close to where Windwalker is, if not maybe better. It comes down to a skill thing there. I think it's mostly just due to complexity. I've noticed, at least on my experience with Outlaw Rogue, there's just a lot of buttons. It's a lot of buttons, and tracking Roll the Bones, while they made it easier, I need to figure out how to set up my UI better, because my personal resource display used to show Roll the Bones right where my health bar is in the middle of my screen. Now it doesn't. I got to figure out how to turn the cooldown manager on and somehow get that there, because if you get the jackpot, it's just the gold buff. To be fair, that's how it used to be in Warlords of Draenor. You had the red buff, right? It used to be like green, red, and yellow, and it was like if you got the red one, you knew you were doing a lot of damage. Now it's like if you get the 1, the 2, or the gold buff, you do a lot of damage. So I don't know which version of this is the best way to show to the average player that you're doing well, but obviously the jackpot one is. I was thinking adding some type of aura to the side of your character, when you get like a Fingers of Frost proc and that isolant's going to hit hard. If you roll a jackpot, I feel like having some animation of like coins or something around your character is like, that you got the jackpot, right? Instead of it just being a box. Whether the box is at the top or the box is in the middle, like some type of visual around your character, because it can give you the big, the gamba dopamine the Outlaw Rogue is supposed to be getting, right? And it could even be the same thing with maybe this is true, I'm not sure 100%, with Between the Eyes, when you get the proc and it resets. Maybe that should have a visual on the screen. It might have it, but I don't think that it does. I feel like they should add those visuals that are on mage classes when you get procs, add those to Outlaw Rogue. It'll make it a lot more dopamine firing at you, a lot easier to understand. Like, oh, I got the coins, I'm doing big damage. Oh, I got the pistol thingy in the middle that's telling me I can do my reset stun, because with Outlaw I feel like my eyes are just staring at the buffs, and there's so many buffs, so many boxes tracking, and it's like I'm not even playing the game, I'm just tracking buffs. That's what I found about it. I feel like you could just streamline it with some of the other animations that they have. Maybe they do have the visuals, but it doesn't feel like they had the visuals, and it just has a lot going on with it is the main thing. But I think it'll probably creep up over time, but it's one of the things where Subtlety Rogue it can do the job, right? Without as much of a headache and without as much as searching around your screen, which is one of the reasons this thing is down here on the ladder, even though it's so good in tournament. Now, when we look at range DPS, Beastmaster Hunter is actually taken to the #1 position. We saw it in the tournament. It was doing a lot of damage to mages with Zozo and Jwaz, so that Red Hunter was doing a lot of damage. So it was definitely viable, even at the most competitive level. Was a little bit squishy, but again, much like Ret Paladin, I think it's just because it's really straightforward, and it can win at high rating and low rating, so it's well-rounded to win across the entire ladder, and it's just simple, easy results. So I think that's why we see it such high representation here on the ladder. Frost Mage, just the most durable mage spec with everything that's going on with the one-shots, and such. I think it makes sense that Frost Mage is up here, and Ray of Frost is just a great one-shot. So again, cooldown window here. is a little bit too strong. Ray of Frost probably needs to come down. Buff damage outside of Ray of Frost, same type of deal. Maybe look at barriers as well. Maybe look at Alter Time as far as defense. But again, like its defense feels flimsy when it's fighting these burst-based classes in their cooldown window. They just disappear in a second, right? So the cooldowns really need to be addressed. Marks is still number 3. And I've been playing my Marks Hunter a lot. It does feel like it can be frustrating to like things like Death Knight, but Death Knight's falling off in popularity, so you don't really have to deal with it that much. It still does a remarkable amount of damage as Dark Ranger, and I feel like they kind of went the wrong way with the changes on this most recently, where they nerfed aim shot and then buffed rapid fire, but it's the cooldowns, the volley, the true shot, like those windows, the modifiers on those windows. And I think it's important to consider the modifiers that come from other classes as well. Like Tricks of the Trade from Rogue is a big damage amp. It's like 15% damage for your partner. The Sphere from Mistweaver is another 10% damage. So this is what we're talking about, like external modifiers. They stack up on top of each other, and then you're just boom, one shot, right? So it's not even just within the spec itself. There's external modifiers being applied as well from allies on top of the base cooldown being strong, which just creates that fulmination and massive overwhelming burst damage, which I don't think is where they wanted to have the current pacing of the game. So Marks is another one that probably needs to be addressed. Fire Mage 1 in both regions had a spectacular representation as far as compositions, but it's still significantly lower than Frost, and I think that's because without having a rogue, you know, like that dedicated synergy stunning for you, you can sometimes get popped a lot by these hunters. So I think its reputation is still a little bit lower, but it's still decent. It's still very decent. Again, I think they should shift damage out of combustion and put that into just general abilities, whether it's Ignite or it's Fire Blast or Fireball, just general abilities. That's why I say like nerf all the cooldowns and maybe buff the primary stat on everything. And try and just do that. That could be the best like blanket way of doing it. But again, some classes don't need more sustain, so maybe again that might not be. I think you kind of have to go more in detail if you're actually going to achieve this. Affliction Warlock's starting to get a lot more uptick, and I've been enjoying mine actually a lot more. I'm not a big fan of Malefic Rapture. I'm glad it was gone, but I'm also not a big fan of UA stacking. My preference for Affliction Warlock was Soulburn Haunt. Back in Warlords of Draenor, I thought that was really fun because it's just if you got the Soulburn Haunt, all your dots are going to be doing a lot of damage for a long time. So it was like focused around keeping dots up and getting that off to try and keep your sustain going. And it felt a little more fair than the previous versions of Warlock where you just put 2 instant dots and their whole team died. This one was like you had to cast a spell to be able to buff the dots, but those dots actually felt really strong. The UA stack though, it's working out better. The Dispel protection is nice. Again, much like Affliction or much like Assassination, I think it's pushing it into a healthier margin. So I think for me right now, as far as DPS, they got to work on bringing down the cooldown windows of some of these higher represented specs, and then buffing their sustain. And then what they've been doing with this has been great. Demonology, it still has the most frustrating amount of crowd control, and we saw it a little bit there in the finals of Europe with Mage Warlock, particularly, which is where I thought it would excel in 3v3. But on the ladder, starting to fall off. Affliction's actually passing it, and it's passing Destruction. This is a huge change from the previous week. Affliction used to be like somewhere down here, I think. So Affliction is definitely on an uprising right now as far as ladder gameplay, if you're an AFLOC out there wondering what's going on. But in tournament, we didn't see it at all. Maybe that changes. I feel like it's probably just going to die too easily, but it doesn't have the same type of lockdown as Demonology, but like maybe. I feel like Mist River Healing is also just too high for the dots to matter at that level of play in 3v3, but in Shuffle, like the bracket that we're looking at right now, it makes more sense because dampening is faster. Demo is just still good because of the CC, and it's got decent sustain. Devourer Demon Hunter is still doing well in the ladder. We didn't see it in the tournament. I think I saw it in the open bracket one time. And honestly, it looked good individually, but it just doesn't have a comp. So I think for me with Devourer is that they need to add a Mortal Strike effect to it so that way it can play with other casters. And it'll be like Demo, where you can play with other casters because you have Mortal Strike. I think because it needs to play with another caster. Otherwise, it's just too much pressure on it with the kit that it's got to be able to cast like it needs to. But it can't play with other casters because it doesn't reduce healing in those compositions. So like maybe Demo, you could play Demo Devour maybe. Or Marksman Devourer is what I was thinking as well for compositions. But I think giving it a Mortal Strike would be nice as far as making it more viable in PvP. And there are obviously big changes for it in 12.0.5, like self-healing. So it's going to be more durable. And they've been addressing the armor, which has been good, which is why I think it's going up in value here. It's still got a very big one-shot, and it's still very cheesy, which again, like those other specs, it just doesn't have the durability at the moment to survive to get those one shots, and it's a little more obvious and slower ramp, so you can't just like pop it instantly. You have to ramp to it, and then you have to use it in that window. I think so. It's more predictable and it's more squishy, which is why it's slightly less represented than a lot of the other burst options. Destro Warlock is just healthy spot. I think like Destro is just good. Like I really like when they did the rework where they removed Dark Soul. Chaos Spell just hits hard all the time, and your spells just feel good when you press them. I think its main issue is it just struggles with Windwalkers. It struggles with Rogues, and like those burst cooldown windows. But like it's just a good spec. Boomkin, I honestly think it could use like a little buff on Star Surge. Maybe I'm being biased, but like a little bit. Like Star Surge, like Blade Rush for an Outlaw Rogue, I saw crit for 130k in the tournament, and Star Surge is hitting me like 30k. So like a little buff on Star Surge, give him a little bit more of an edge, I think would be nice. It's kind of the same thing with Shadow Priest, like a little bit more damage there, maybe on Void Torrent or target Mind Blast or something like that. Just a little bit more threatening damage on these specializations could help them out a bit here. But I think for them, it's also like if you brought down the cooldown windows and then you addressed Mistweaver, because Mistweaver kind of counters them both, you would probably see them start upticking in general. I think right now the most egregious thing is addressing the cooldowns on the strongest specs, and then going from there and seeing if anything does actually need help, or if it's just because it's completely overshadowed by how powerful the cooldowns are at the moment, in my view. Devastation Evoker, we saw it in the tournament. It got very far in the tournament, and honestly, it's pretty easy to pull off. So I was actually expecting Devastation to be higher than this. It's actually lower than Shadow Priest, which is unexpected because of how many people are talking about Shadow Priest maybe not being that great. Although in Shuffle, maybe it's a bit better because dampening's faster. But Devastation was one of the specs where I was expecting it to be like, in top 5 at least, but it's in bottom 4. It doesn't mean it's bad though. I still think it's a great spec to pick up. Still very straightforward, easy. It's going to get your goals accomplished if you don't have a lot of time to play. And it's just getting one shot by the rogues mostly is the main issue. So given that Assassination has got buffed, and then we see Outlaw now is in a really strong spot, and maybe it's not going to get nerfed because obviously like the average player is not going to be able to pull off what we're seeing at tournament play, which usually means that they're not going to nerf that type of situation. Maybe you continue to struggle. Ellie Shaman, which we actually saw, a lot of teams almost beating the number 1, 2 seeds with Ellie Shamans, but it just doesn't. It just doesn't do damage outside of Ascendance. So you're very threatening. Ascendance is up, and then you got to wait 2 minutes. So in a game with Mistweaver where they have 1 minute cooldowns that they cycle through, you're never finding an opening there. Its only advantage in tournament settings is it does a lot of healing, and it's very tanky. So you can basically be like a secondary healer until you get to dampening, which nerfs the Mistweaver healing, and then you can win with Ascendance. So you see how it sounds like it's very scripted and very cooldown oriented, which is what I don't think they wanted the game to be. So for me, Ellie is one of those specs where like they need to look at the cooldown windows. There's a lot of modifiers with haste stacking between Bloodlust, Stormkeeper, and then Ascendance. Maybe looking at those and then just buffing Lava Burst and Lightning Bolt baseline and just having it do damage without cooldowns would be my ideal world. And then Arcane Mage is just falling off a cliff as far as viability. It's just really awkward with having to cast everything compared to Fire or Frost. It's not as tanky. It can get bulldozed over. So for me, it's just, I don't even know with this one. It's just landed in a weird spot. I don't even know if PvEers are necessarily happy with how it is at the moment either. It's just very squishy, no damage reduction cooldown, only 1 school of magic. And what's weird is that when they tried to help it, they buffed Arcanosphere, which is one of the most notorious one-shot abilities. So it's weird to me to like, I guess maybe they just think of Arcane as a cheesy one-shot spec. I'm not sure. Because that approach to it was like, you're kind of putting gasoline on the fire, like a lot of the things that are making PvP difficult for a lot of players is that the cooldowns do too much damage and the damage outside doesn't. So buffing Arcanosphere is just making another cooldown. You know what I mean? But it's like if you want to compete and you don't want to go that route, then yeah, they're going to need Arcanosphere. It's just in a weird spot. It kind of depends on what they do, obviously, with future tuning. And then AUG still just probably just doesn't seem like a cool spec maybe for a lot of people. Not to roast the people who do enjoy playing it, but obviously for the majority of people, they just maybe don't find it that cool because it's got such a low representation. Doesn't mean it's not viable. It's probably decently tanky and probably has some type of one-shot. I just never encounter it, which is why some players are able to actually make it work here. And then finally healers, which is like, this one was like the most, I would say, imbalanced still. Even I think every single patch has been a nerf to Mistweaver. It's still the best healer. And I think the reason for that is it doesn't Doesn't have to cast because Shaylun's Gift is instant cast for some reason without using Soothing Mist. Like, what is that? That just shouldn't even exist. Like, what? You just Shaylun's Gift even without having to channel? That's crazy, man. It's so much throughput. And then Life Cocoon is such a short cooldown. Although they did try and target that and nerf that, it still feels like it's too short of a cooldown. Revival being usable and stun and a really powerful effect to just immune damage. Being able to port while stunned, which, in the past didn't seem that overpowered, but in the current meta of burst damage and being able to port away from that one shot for 2 seconds is like one of the best things you could do as a healer that not every other healer has available to it. So I think mostly it's like you got to target some department because it's got the best damage, the best mana, the best throughput, the best cooldowns, the best mobility. It's just the best in every category. So it's like you got to go after something there. I think to me the most egregious would be the Life Cocoon CD and then probably the instant Shayluns, not having to expose its school of magic, so you can't really outplay it. It is one thing as far as its overall throughput. Those would be the most outstanding. Disc, interestingly enough, is very well represented on the ladder and didn't even exist in the tournament. I almost wanted to see somebody play it in the tournament just to see why. Because when you look at the ladder, you're like, Disc is pretty gnarly. Like, bro, you can play Void Weaver when you can get away with it. It does a bunch of damage. And then otherwise you can play Oracle and play safe with Penance. I'm going to guess it's because it's got a serious mana issue at tournament level play. Because it literally makes no sense to me how powerful it is on the ladder and how it had absolutely zero play when it came to tournament. That just that disparity between the two is crazy to me. It makes it seem like you should buff it, but it's like, well, you're going crazy on the ladder. So Disc is a weird one. That's a weird one for me to try to even suggest a solution because it's just so good on the ladder. But it's just, maybe bringing Mistweaver down, addressing the cooldowns, and it just lands in the perfect spot where it is. We don't have to move it. That's why I think the first step is dealing with the outliers here towards the top. Mistweaver, though, unlike the other specs, I do think it's just going to need to get nerfed. And again, that sounds bad. Like, well, how are they supposed to heal through the damage? Well, because they should nerf the cooldowns of all the DPS so that all these guys aren't freaking out. And some of these guys probably should get buffed too. But you have to address the cooldowns. Otherwise, then it makes sense in the current design that Mistweaver just has everything crazy, low cooldown and instant, because how is it else going to react to dying in a millisecond? It wouldn't be able to. But that's why you have to address everything. I hope that can be accomplished. I feel like it can. They've done it for other specs. I don't know why they wouldn't be able to do it for all of them. Warrior being an example of that, bringing down the cooldowns, buffing the damage outside of it. So don't know why that wouldn't be achievable. It's been done before on other specs. But then Holy Pally, still high on ladder representation, even though I think it's falling off a lot. I think it's got some mana issues, survivability issues that are tagging into it ever since they really gunned down on its damage output. From its Hammer of Wrath for the melee wings. That's where we've seen it fall off. I think they were trying really hard to rebalance Herald of the Sun to be able to be more viable than the weapons build. But it's just maybe it's in a healthy spot if they bring down the cooldowns of all the DPS and they bring down Mistweaver, slightly, some element of Mistweaver. But healer mana in general just seems really out of whack. Like some healers just in 3 minutes, other ones are full for 15 minutes. Holy Priest is one of those. They just seem like they have really good mana. I was actually expecting Holy to be higher than this. Holy was like the only other healer significantly represented than Mistweaver in tournament, but on ladder, not a lot of them. Even though I think it's got the best mana, great throughput, easy to play. It's one of the specs where they pruned it down to a very simplistic level where it's more accessible for a lot of people. It's the same as Druid, which I think I feel like Druid is significantly weaker, but it's actually still the same on ladder. And with Resto Druid, again, survivability is kind of a bit of an issue with them. But if they target the cooldown so you're not just dying in a millisecond, maybe it's fine. It's a very tough situation for me to recommend with the healers, just unless they actually target every single cooldown and nerf the cooldowns on those damage dealers and then buff their sustain and then go after Mistweaver's mechanics, because some of the mechanics are just absolutely bonkers. I mean, if they wanted to shift people's interest into Monk, because Monk is typically not a popular class, right? If the goal was to shift interest in it because it's less popular, they did that. Everyone's a Brewmaster, Mythic Plus, everyone's a Mistweaver, everybody's a Windwalker Monk. I feel like they've done that. They've shown that if you make something really strong, everybody's going to play it. But is it the type of gameplay that you want? Do you want the gameplay to be this really twitchy cooldown reaction type? If so, then you need to buff all the instant healing on all these guys. If you don't want that and you want the damage to be about sustained damage, then you need to go in and nerf Mistweaver's mechanics. You need to nerf all of the cooldowns and then consider where the buffs need to go for these guys, because maybe they don't. It's just the cooldown damage is so exceedingly high that they feel like they're bad. So it's a step-by-step case thing, I think, for this. Preservation Evoker actually was seen in the tournament a fair bit, although it was really struggling with rogues in a lot of scenarios, and even the one pres that was there did end up re-rolling a monk at one point in the tournament. So Again, kind of just depends on how they want to go about the cooldowns with this. And then Restoration Shaman, it just doesn't have the cooldowns. A lot of these guys down here can like die through their cooldowns in a lot of cases, whereas Mistweaver is kind of just like every minute, Life Goon, you're good. Life Goon, you're good. And they're just kind of making their way. But that's my assessment right now. We've seen some shifts. Assassination, Affliction stonks are going up. Definitely some improvements, but still more work to be done. And I'm hoping their goal is to make the game not about one-shotting people with cooldowns and make sustain more viable, because the specs that they've done that on has felt really fun to play. Those have been some of my favorite specs to play that they've done. So please do it with the rest of them. Just do it with the rest of the specs. I know it's probably a lot. It's a lot of work. I don't know if they expected more progress at this point or not, but I'm really hoping. I'm crossing my fingers, because I think that is the ideal state for the game, whether you're a beginner or a pro player. I think that is the ideal state. It's the least frustrating, the least triggering. So I do hope that will happen. If you guys agree, let me know in the comments down below. But that's it for this video here. Thank you guys very much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.